Imagine, imagine you discover that the front door to a massive national infrastructure database is just, well, it's just wide open.
Right, just completely unlocked.
Exactly. We are talking about millions of health records, citizens' private data, biometrics, all just sitting there, totally unprotected on the internet.
Yeah.
So, you do the right thing. You
All right.
quietly report it to the authorities so they can fix it before, like, a malicious actor finds it. And the state's response?
Definitely not what you'd expect.
Right. They don't give you a medal. They don't even patch the system right away. Instead, they throw you in a maximum security prison.
Wow.
They completely destroy your life savings, and they brand you a criminal, all to just cover up their own glaring incompetence.
I mean, it sounds like some kind of dystopian thriller, right?
Yeah.
But it is the documented reality of how modern institutional bureaucracies actually function.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Because when the system is broken, it doesn't fix the code. It eliminates the person who found the bug.
Which is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking you on this sweeping, really intense forensic examination of what happens when the state literally criminalizes technical curiosity.
And, crucially, how one incredibly resilient ethical hacker fought back against it.
Yes, we are looking at a literal narrative war fought by Alberto Daniel Hill. He is a highly credentialed cybersecurity expert who basically systematically dismantled the official narratives of both state institutions and private threat intelligence firms across Latin America.
Specifically focusing on that critical timeline, right? From the early digital defacements of early 2025 all the way through those catastrophic data collapses in June 2026.
That's the core of it. And the stack of source material we're working with today is, I mean, it's just phenomenal.
Oh, it's incredible. We aren't just looking at sanitized government press releases here.
No, not at all.
We have Hill's own strategic threat intelligence dossiers. We have his DFCON 2026 call for paper submissions.
Which are super detailed.
Extremely detailed. We also have internal audits of this independent media ecosystem he built. And perhaps most significantly, we have a sanitized but highly revealing set of Telegram chat logs from June 2026.
Yeah, and those logs, those are between Hill and the actual coordinator of a notorious underground hacktivist collective known as PampaLeaks.
Right. It is a raw, totally unvarnished look at digital reality.
It really is. And our mission today, for you listening, isn't just to walk you through some dry timeline of cyber attacks.
No, if we did that, we'd be missing the entire point of Hill's work.
Exactly. We are unpacking a profound concept that he refers to as algorithmic jurisprudence.
It's a heavy term, but it makes so much sense once you see it.
It does. It's this terrifying idea that the state apparatus, the justice system, law enforcement, they operate like a rigid, unthinking algorithm, one that prioritizes institutional reputation way above objective truth.
And we're going to explore his response to that algorithm, too. How Hill engineered the CYBERMIDNIGHT CLUB, which is this independent, asymmetrical intelligence network designed to weaponize radical transparency and basically bypass the state's control of information entirely.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand why Alberto Daniel Hill is fighting this massive high-stakes narrative war in 2025 and 2026, we actually can't start there.
No, you really have to go back.
We have to look at the trauma and the systemic failure that fundamentally altered his life and basically forged his current worldview. We have to go back to 2017.
It really is the crucible moment for him. And it centers on a concept that is foundational to cybersecurity, but heavily misunderstood by the public and apparently by the justice system.
Yeah, responsible disclosure.
Exactly. Responsible disclosure, which is essentially the core duty of a white hat or ethical hacker.
Right. And let's be super clear about who we are talking about here. Alberto Daniel Hill is not some, teenager sitting in a basement guessing passwords for fun.
Not at all.
He is an established, platinum-certified computer engineer. He holds a master's degree in digital currencies. He's a certified ethical hacker, or CEH.
Which means he is literally trained, tested, and licensed to think exactly like a malicious actor.
Right, to find the holes first.
Right, in order to find architectural weaknesses before the real criminals do. It requires an incredibly high level of systems understanding.
Exactly. So picture this. In 2014, Hill is analyzing the digital infrastructure of a government-linked medical provider in Uruguay called the Círculo Católico.
Right.
And what he finds is a catastrophic architectural flaw. It's this vulnerability that leaves highly sensitive private health data completely exposed to the open internet.
Which is terrifying. If a malicious actor, a black hat hacker, found this, the playbook is really simple for them.
Yeah, what do they do?
Well, they exfiltrate the database, right? They pull all the data out, and then they either hold the hospital hostage with ransomware, or they just go and sell those medical profiles on the dark web.
Because it's super valuable data.
Oh, it's highly lucrative. Health data is worth a lot.
But Hill follows the ethical protocol. He doesn't do any of that. He attempts a responsible disclosure. He goes to CERTUI, which is the National Computer Emergency Response Team in Uruguay.
He does everything by the book.
Right. He basically hands them the blueprints and says, look, your locks are broken, the door's wide open, you need to patch this immediately.
And this is where the system's underlying logic really reveals itself. Because you would expect a rational institution to say, wow, thank you, we will secure the data immediately.
Yeah, like thanks for saving us from a massive lawsuit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that requires admitting fault.
Yeah.
It requires a bureaucratic entity to actually acknowledge a failure.
Which they never want to do.
Never. Instead, the state weaponized the disclosure against him. In 2017, this culminated in what became known as Operation Bitcoins, and Hill became Uruguay's first hacker to be wrongfully imprisoned.
The sources outline the absolute absurdity of the evidence used against him here. Hill refers to it as forensic theater.
Forensic theater, that is so accurate.
Honestly, reading through the documents, I can't think of a better term for it. It was a performance designed to look like a real investigation, but it was entirely devoid of any scientific validity.
The sheer technical illiteracy is staggering. I mean, let's just look at how they handled his digital devices.
Oh, this part is wild.
There are strict international standards for digital forensics. Specifically, it's called ISO/IEC 27037.
Right.
These are the gold standard rules for chain of custody and evidence preservation. And the fundamental, absolute #1 rule of seizing a powered-off mobile device is that you do not, under any circumstances, turn it on.
Wait, really? Because I feel like the first thing a cop in a movie does is turn the phone on to look at the text messages. Why is that a violation?
Because a smartphone isn't a static piece of paper, right? It is a dynamic, active computer.
Oh, sure.
The moment you power it on, the operating system initiates thousands of background processes. It overwrites temporary files, it alters system timestamps, it connects to cellular networks, it downloads pending messages.
So it changes the evidence.
It fundamentally contaminates the pristine state of the device. It alters the crime scene, basically. What you are supposed to do is clone the encrypted storage while it's inside a Faraday bag.
Which blocks all the signals.
Exactly. It blocks all incoming and outgoing signals. And then you analyze the clone, never the original.
But the sources explicitly state that Interpol just took his powered-off Samsung Galaxy S7 and just hit the power button.
Just turned it right on.
And Hill actually proved this later. After he got out of prison, he checked his Google location history. The data showed that his phone had been powered on and active for 5 days while sitting inside the Carcel Central, which is the central prison in Montevideo.
Yeah.
The evidence wasn't just contaminated, it was literally destroyed by the very people claiming to investigate it.
And the proof they presented in court to justify throwing him in prison is even more egregious. They didn't bring immutable digital forensic artifacts or cryptographically verified network packets.
Yeah.
They brought paper.
Paper. I was reading this and I actually had to stop. They brought paper-printed firewall logs. Yeah.
Anyone with, like, a basic text editor can type up a fake log, put in a few IP addresses, and hit print. How is a piece of paper admissible as technical proof of a sophisticated breach in a modern court?
It shouldn't be. Especially since the logs they printed only showed dropped network connections.
Which means what exactly?
Which is just the internet background noise of automated scanners pinging servers all day long. Any entry-level IT student knows a dropped connection proves the firewall actually worked, not that a breach occurred.
Wow.
But a technically illiterate judge looks at a stack of paper with complicated numbers on it, assumes it's authoritative, and just signs the warrant.
But the collateral damage of this theater wasn't just his reputation or his freedom. Because he was an early adopter of cryptocurrency, he had significant digital assets. And when law enforcement seized his hardware, they also seized the physical backups of his two-factor authentication seeds.
Which completely locked him out of his own financial ecosystem. Exactly. And the timing was devastating. He was locked out of his accounts during the exact window when the crypto exchange he was using, WEX.NZ, collapsed.
Oh, man.
Because the state was holding his 2FA seeds in an evidence locker, he couldn't move his funds. He lost over $100,000 in personal assets. They completely wiped out his financial livelihood.
And we really cannot ignore the human cost here either. The psychological toll of that initial detention was brutal.
The documents highlight a really disturbing detail about this. During his initial 48-hour detention, he was locked in a concrete box at Carcel Central. And the state deliberately denied him his essential prescribed ADHD and anxiety medications.
Yeah.
It's basically a sensory deprivation tactic combined with chemical withdrawal.
And this intense trauma is what leads us to Hill's philosophical framework. He didn't just walk away from this angry. He walked away with a profound structural understanding of how state power actually operates.
Right.
And he leans heavily on two specific works of art to explain this, which is interesting. He uses a prophetic 2009 manuscript by Alan J. Friedman called Timothy Bolt, and a 2014 independent film directed by Jonathan Schiffer called Algorithm.
I found this part fascinating because instead of just writing, a dry technical white paper, he uses these creative works to translate the nightmare for the rest of us.
It's highly effective. In Friedman's Timothy Bolt, the narrative explores the concept of the machine that wasn't. It describes this illusory bureaucratic world where citizens are completely stripped of their humanity and reduced to mere cogs serving a corrupt, self-perpetuating system.
Like they're just fuel for it.
Exactly. And Hill maps this directly onto the modern state apparatus, coining the term the Great Machine.
So in his view, the justice system isn't a group of human beings making rational, evidence-based decisions. It's essentially just an algorithm.
Yes. It is an unthinking, automated machine completely devoid of digital empathy or digital literacy. When a vulnerability is exposed, the machine doesn't optimize for truth. It optimizes for self-preservation.
Right.
It demands what he calls a processed body. It needs a scapegoat to feed into the legal system, to justify its institutional budget, and to basically mask the profound incompetence of its own administrators.
And that concept brings us to what Hill identifies as the protocol of silence. This is the default defense mechanism of the great machine.
Yeah, this is key.
State institutions or large corporations realize their systems are vulnerable. But instead of transparently collaborating with the researchers who find the flaws, they actively suppress the indicators of compromise. They bury the evidence.
Right.
They hide the vulnerabilities from the public to protect their own PR, entirely sacrificing the safety of the citizens whose data is just sitting in those vulnerable databases.
It is the ultimate betrayal of the public trust.
It's infuriating. Think about it like this. Imagine you discover that the expensive monitored security system you bought for your house is actually just a hollow, fake plastic box glued to the wall.
Like a dummy camera.
Yeah, there are no wires. So you call the security company to report the fraud. And the company's response is to call the police and have you arrested for tampering with proprietary equipment, just so the rest of the neighborhood doesn't find out and sue them.
That's a perfect analogy.
So let me ask you this. If the state's response to an ethical hacker pointing out a flaw is to throw them in a maximum security prison, doesn't that just guarantee that all the real vulnerabilities are left completely ignored and wide open for the actual bad guys?
Yes, absolutely. You've just identified the exact causal mechanism that triggered the massive cybersecurity crisis of 2025 and 2026.
Wow.
By silencing Alberto Daniel Hill and criminalizing his ethical curiosity, the state engineered a catastrophic chilling effect.
The good guys just got scared.
They were completely paralyzed. The local white hat community, the independent researchers who essentially function as the nation's blue team.
The early warning radar, basically.
Exactly. The early warning radar for critical infrastructure. They completely shut down. They looked at the fabricated evidence, the seized assets, the psychological torture of Hill, and they said, I am not risking my freedom and my family to help a state that will actively frame me.
So the radar is turned off, the state is just flying blind into a hurricane.
Exactly. This structural paralysis directly paved the way for the wave of catastrophic data breaches that swept through Latin America between 2024 and 2026.
Because no one was there to warn them.
Right. The state had effectively blinded itself. And this is the precise environment where Hill steps back into the arena.
Yeah.
Not as a victim trying to clear his name, but as a formidable, highly organized counter-narrative force.
Which brings us to the early 2025 timeline, specifically March of 2025. We start seeing these highly publicized digital defacements hitting major state and corporate targets in Uruguay.
Yes.
The sources highlight two major ones, the DINATIA, which is the National Civil Aviation Authority, and Bukibus, a major regional ferry company.
Right. And for the listener, a defacement is essentially digital graffiti.
Like spray painting a wall.
Exactly. It's when an attacker breaches a website and alters the visual appearance of the homepage,
Yeah.
usually leaving a message or a logo.
And immediately, the official media and the private corporate threat intelligence firms just go into overdrive. They start blasting out these severe alerts, blaming highly sophisticated, elite, cartel-level actors for these breaches.
Yeah, making it sound like a movie.
They paint this terrifying picture of organized cyber syndicates launching complex, coordinated attacks against the nation's critical infrastructure.
But Hill, operating independently, looks at this. And he utilizes his own forensic OSINT, open source intelligence.
Let's define that quickly, because we'll talk about OSINT a lot. He's not using secret government spy satellites or anything.
Oh, no.
He is using publicly available data, digital breadcrumbs left on underground forums, social media timestamps, metadata embedded in images, and he uses all that to forensically reconstruct what actually happened.
Correct. He uses OSINT combined with his deep connections in the underground researcher network, and he completely dismantles the official story.
He proves that these attacks weren't the work of an elite cartel using million-dollar zero-day exploits. It was essentially a group of attention-seeking teenagers.
Yeah.
Kids using online avatars like Vladdy and gov.eth, and they were using incredibly low-level amateur tactics.
Very amateur.
In one case, they literally just used a stolen photograph of someone's physical ID card to bypass basic verification and deface a website for clout. They were just doing it for bragging rights on hacker forums.
Which creates a glaring contradiction. Why would private professional threat intelligence firms drastically exaggerate the sophistication of a teenager with a stolen photo, framing it as an elite cartel attack?
Because according to Hill's incredibly detailed investigations, it's a massive corporate grift.
A huge one.
And the sources point the finger directly at a specific private threat intelligence firm operating in the region called BCA Ltd, and specifically a figure associated with it named Mauro Caceres, who operates under the alias Eldritch.
And Hill didn't just, tweet a disagreement about this. He produced a massive, heavily researched 35-page PDF dossier that meticulously exposed how firms like BCA Ltd literally manufacture public panic.
The granular details in this report are wild. He demonstrates how these threat intel firms take tiny, completely insignificant data dumps and just weaponize them.
Right, yeah.
He cites one example where they took a file from a company called Alonzo Automobiles. The file was literally 448 bytes in size.
Bytes, not kilobytes or megabytes.
Yeah. That is smaller than a single paragraph of text in a Word document. And they use this microscopic file to fabricate the existence of massive, looming hacker ghost groups.
They invent menacing cinematic names for them, too, like ex-presidents or dead presidents, just to make them sound like highly organized criminal syndicates.
It's the literal commercialization of fear. They take these fabricated ghost groups and they amplify the threat through traditional media channels. And the traditional media, which generally lacks the deep technical expertise to verify a 448-byte file, just runs with the press release.
Because it makes a good headline.
Exactly. The public panics, and more importantly, the corporate executives at major enterprises get terrified.
And that leads to the monetization phase. Once the corporate boards are adequately terrified of the ex-president's cartel, BCA Ltd turns around and offers this solution.
Of course they do.
They sell these enterprises access to their proprietary threat monitoring platform for $29,000 a year.
It is a digital protection racket built entirely on ghost stories. You invent the monster, you scare the villagers, and then you sell them the pitchforks.
But when you expose a $29,000 a year grift, you make powerful enemies.
Very powerful. And the state and these corporate actors did not take Hill's 35-page debunking lightly at all. In Hill's DEFCON 2026 Call for Papers documentation, there is a genuinely chilling revelation about the lengths a machine will go to in order to retaliate.
This part is so dark.
To justify placing Hill under ongoing invasive state surveillance and to manufacture a pretense for legal intimidation, state actors actually artificially planted Hill's personal email address, alberto.daniel.hill@ directly into the fabricated doxing databases that they were linking to threat avatars like gov.eth and Vladdy.
We really need to pause and consider the implications of that. The very institutions charged with protecting the objective truth are actively maliciously polluting the digital forensic record.
Yeah.
They are salting the crime scene to frame an independent researcher who proved them wrong. And what's remarkable is that Hill's finding wasn't just a paranoid theory. It was independently validated by an international investigative journalism outlet, databreaches.net.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because think about the strategic nightmare Hill is in here. If the traditional media is just blindly laundering these fake corporate press releases, and the state itself is actively planting fabricated evidence in databases to frame you, how does one guy, even a brilliant, platinum-certified engineer, actually get the truth out to the public? How do you fight a narrative war when the enemy owns the printing press and the courts?
You realize that you cannot win by playing within their system. You have to build your own infrastructure.
Right.
You build an ecosystem that the state cannot easily regulate, censor, or switch off. For Alberto Daniel Hill, that solution was the creation of a fully integrated, radically independent intelligence agency. He called it the CYBERMIDNIGHT CLUB.
The CyberMidnight ecosystem is a masterclass in asymmetrical digital warfare. The documents provide a full media ecosystem audit of the platform from February 2026, and the architecture is brilliant.
It is entirely built on a philosophy of being distributed by design. It isn't just a single website or a single social media account.
Which would be too easy to block.
It exists as the decentralized matrix of interconnected platforms. He built a central high-traffic intelligence hub, an expansive audio podcast library, direct-to-inbox newsletters, and a heavy reliance on live social audio. It is engineered specifically to bypass centralized algorithmic filters and state-level suppression tactics.
Because if you just put all your exposing dossiers on one standard website hosted in your home country, the state just issues a legal takedown notice to the hosting provider and poof, you're gone. You're silenced again.
Yeah, it's a single point of failure.
But if it's distributed, taking down one node doesn't kill the network.
Exactly. But the true engine driving the entire CyberMidnight ecosystem is what the internal audits call the live-to-podcast sourcing pipeline.
This mechanism is so smart. Instead of sitting alone in a studio for 3 weeks, writing a script and producing a highly sanitized, safe show, Hill goes live.
Yeah.
He hosts these raw, unscripted, highly dynamic social audio sessions on platforms like Xspaces. And these aren't just casual hangouts. They function as real-time, open-source threat intelligence hubs.
Because he holds such deep credibility within the underground and researcher communities, he attracts a wildly diverse, unprecedented crowd to these live spaces.
It's a crazy mix of people.
You have certified security practitioners, investigative journalists, legal experts, and, crucially, active operational threat actors, all sitting in the exact same digital room, debating the reality of a breach in real time.
Wait, so he's hosting a live audio room where the journalist writing the article, the IT guy trying to patch the server, and the hacker who broke into the server are all talking to each other? That's insane.
It's unprecedented visibility. And Hill captures that ephemeral live audio. He structurally segments it, runs it through automated transcription pipelines, and rapidly pushes it out as podcast episodes in deeply researched forensic dossiers.
Wow.
It is raw, it is incredibly fast, and it completely outpaces the slow, bureaucratic, heavily lawyered protocol of silence. By the time the state drafts a press release denying a breach, CyberMidnight has already published the audio of the threat actor, explaining exactly how they bypass the firewall.
And the metrics of success detailed in the audit are undeniable. By early 2026, the CyberMidnight intelligence ecosystem boasts a calculated core reach of over 77,000 highly targeted cybersecurity professionals.
Generating millions of annual impressions.
And it achieved an unparalleled media influence ranking of 95 out of 100. It broke out of being just a local Uruguayan phenomenon. A massive chunk of the listenership is actively based in the United States.
Right.
His findings are being cited in academic publications by global investigative journalists and presented at major hacker conferences like EcoParty.
But that brings up a really vital question. Why do people trust him?
Yeah, that's the big question.
In an era of rampant misinformation, where he is actively operating outside the traditional verified media channels, why do 77,000 security professionals take his word over the official state broadcast?
It comes down to the core philosophy that anchors the entire CyberMidnight project. Hill calls it radical transparency.
How does that work in practice?
Well, Hill fundamentally understands that this sanitized, heavily PR-driven statements put out by corporations and governments inherently breed distrust. The public has been lied to and betrayed by these institutions way too many times.
Do we take your security seriously?
Yeah, we take your security seriously has become a meaningless corporate reflex. So Hill goes in the absolute opposite direction. He openly, aggressively shares his personal flaws. He talks publicly about his anxiety. He discusses the severe trauma of his imprisonment. He admits when his early analysis might have been slightly off.
And he backs up the technical side with hard math, too. He puts his technical truths out there, and he often cryptographically signs his reports with PGP keys.
Which is crucial. PGP, or pretty good privacy, is a cryptographic method. When Hill signs a document with his private PGP key, it acts like an unbreakable digital wax seal.
Right.
Anyone in the world can use his public key to verify that the document hasn't been altered by even a single comma since he published it, and that it unequivocally came from him.
So he's essentially saying to the audience, look, I am a flawed human being. I have been psychologically broken by this system. I struggle with anxiety. But here is the undeniable, mathematically verifiable proof of what is actually happening on these servers.
Exactly, and that intense vulnerability builds an unbreakable organic trust with the audience. A generic corporate press release can never achieve that level of connection. Cyber Midnight functions as a psychological safe space for professionals who are exhausted by navigating this digital dystopia.
And he doesn't limit himself to just dry technical reports either. He engages in highly creative narrative warfare to keep the audience engaged.
Yeah, he does.
He published a book titled Log into Hell, also known as Operation Bitcoins. Log into Hell, which meticulously details his malicious prosecution. He actually produces and releases conceptual industrial ambient music albums.
I saw that.
He has titles like Be Nice or Go to Hell and The Beauty of a Secret. He even ran something called the Batman Campaign, which used dark humor and pop culture to openly mock the state's total inability to identify real cyber threats.
You know, when we were reviewing the sources, it hit me. Building Cyber Midnight. It's exactly like setting up an encrypted pirate radio station during a total authoritarian media blackout.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
But instead of just playing rebellious rock music to stick it to the man, you are broadcasting the exact, highly technical architectural blueprints of the government's failing firewall live on the air, while the government is simultaneously insisting on state TV that the firewall is impenetrable.
That is the perfect analogy. He built a pirate radio station of empirical truth, and that pirate network faced its ultimate defining test in May of 2026.
Yeah.
This is the moment where the vulnerabilities Hill had been screaming about for years finally culminated in a catastrophic, undeniable national collapse.
The Antel Tuit breach.
Yes. For context for our listeners, Tuit is Uruguay's centralized digital identity system. It is managed by the state telecommunications monopoly Antel. It acts as the central hub for citizens to authenticate their digital lives, accessing government services, banking, medical records.
It's the crown jewels.
It really is.
And in May 2026, the hacktivist collective known as La Pampa Leaks shattered it. The scale of this exfiltration is just staggering. The sources confirm that 8 gigabytes of highly sensitive Uruguayan citizen data was pulled out of the system.
Which is a massive amount of text data.
Huge. We are talking about cedulas, which are the national ID cards, home addresses, biometrics, and cryptographic digital signatures.
And we need to emphasize, this wasn't just passive data theft. They didn't just copy a spreadsheet and run. The breach exposed hard-coded API keys, unrevoked digital certificates, and exposed OAuth client credentials.
Okay, let's translate that for the listener. What does it actually mean to expose OAuth client credentials and hard-coded API keys?
Think of oath and API keys like the master key rings for a massive automated hotel. Antel didn't just leak the names and room numbers of the guests. By leaving API keys hard-coded, meaning the passwords were just written in plain text directly into the source code of the app, they leaked the master key cards that allow anyone to walk into the back-end servers and impersonate the administration.
Yeah.
It allowed for active back-end manipulation of the state's infrastructure.
A total structural compromise. So what does the great machine do when faced with a total compromise of the citizens' identities?
It executes its programming, it activates the protocol of silence. Antel executives immediately come out publicly and issue statements claiming, oh, this is just old data, there is no active breach, these aren't passwords, your accounts are safe. They engage in extreme, desperate narrative minimization.
And right on cue, they start looking for their process body. They need a scapegoat to feed to the public so the executives can keep their job.
Precisely. And who do they target? They focus on a 19-year-old kid online who goes by the handle Uruguayo1337. And guess who helps the state identify this kid?
Yeah, tell me.
The private threat intel firm, BCA Ltd. They dox this teenager, hand his information over, and parade him in the media as the ruthless mastermind leader of the La Pampleaks cartel.
It's sickening. The machine repeats its exact pattern. In 2017, the scapegoat was Alberto Daniel Hill. In 2026, it's a 19-year-old kid. But the variable has changed. This time, Hill has the massive CYBERMIDNIGHT infrastructure ready, and he's not going to let them run the playbook in the dark.
Which brings us to the most extraordinary artifact in our entire source stack. The Bounded exhibit, the telegram logs.
In June 2026, right in the fallout of the Tuid collapse, Hill actually manages to establish direct contact with the real operational coordinator of the Pampleaks Collective via the encrypted messaging app Telegram.
Right.
And we have the sanitized logs of that conversation.
It is a masterclass in extracting intelligence. And what we read in those raw logs fundamentally empirically dismantles every aspect of the state and corporate narrative. First and foremost, the Pampleaks operator explicitly confirms to Hill that Uruguayo 1337 was absolutely not their leader.
No.
He was just a low-level peripheral collaborator who got caught.
The kid was a nobody in the hierarchy. He's just a convenient body to process. But the logs go so much deeper into the psychology of the machine. Hill and the threat actor actually discuss the interrogation techniques used by state law enforcement.
This part is fascinating.
The Pampa operator validates a theory that has developed about la psicologica, the psychological method.
The threat actor describes with chilling accuracy how the state investigators operate. Because the state lacks the digital literacy to gather actual technical proof of a breach, they rely entirely on psychological warfare.
Right.
They isolate a 19-year-old kid. They tell him they have everything on him, even when they have nothing. They threaten to arrest his family. They blackmail him, terrify him, and exhaust him until he loses all sense of control and simply confesses to orchestrating massive cyber campaigns he barely understands, just to make the screaming stop.
And reading the logs, there's this profound moment. The Pampa operator literally types to Hill in the chat. They did this to you too.
Yeah.
The underground hacktivists, the criminals, fully recognize that the state used the exact same psychological torture on Alberto Daniel Hill in 2017 to try and extract a false confession about the Círculo Católico responsible disclosure.
It is a stunning, deeply dark validation of Hill's lived experience, coming from the very threat actors the state claims to be fighting. But the logs also reveal the sheer operational arrogance of the threat actors toward the state's incompetence.
They were just laughing at them.
They openly mock the infrastructure. They joke about how lazy the state engineers are, noting that almost every critical service is centralized entirely on Antel's fragile network. The operator types, control Antel, you control the whole state.
Wow.
They talk about finding hard-coded API keys literally everywhere they look. It's like shooting fish in a barrel for them.
And it becomes clear that Pampleaks wasn't just operating in a little Uruguayan bubble. The logs show them moving laterally across Latin America with terrifying ease. The operator talks casually about their ongoing operations, scraping the RENAPR database in Argentina.
Which is massive. RENAPR is the National Registry of Persons in Argentina. It contains the core identity data for tens of millions of citizens.
Right. And the Pampa operator is enthusiastically showing Hill how they are setting up an automated API version 1.1 to sell VIP data from Argentina to anyone with crypto.
Yeah.
They bragged about doxing 3 different presidents in a single forum post. They even built a feature into their API to let buyers filter targeted individuals by their zodiac sign. It's so absurd it sounds like a dark comedy, but it is terrifyingly real.
And amidst all this chaos and bragging, the most crucial piece of intelligence for Hill's overarching campaign emerges from the chat. Pampleaks completely and unequivocally validates Hill's 35-page dossier on the corporate grift of BCA Ltd.
Oh, this is the best part of the transcript. The Pampa operator confirms that the group's BCA Ltd had been hyping up to the media. The menacing ex-president's cartel were completely fake.
Made up.
The operator actually laughs about Mauro Caceres and BCA Ltd. They say that selling that fabricated threat data for $29,000 to terrified corporations is ridiculous.
Yeah.
They note that in the real operational underground forums, absolutely no one respects those fabricated ghost groups. The operator describes it as just shitposting with tiny scraps of sensitive data to generate corporate panic and drive up Intel subscriptions.
Okay, I have to jump in and push back here.
Yeah.
Because we need to be really clear about what we are discussing.
Sure.
Pampleaks is an active malicious entity. They are actively selling stolen citizen data. They are doxing presidents. They are joking about building search engines to let stalkers buy VIP records by zodiac sign.
Right.
Why on earth is Alberto Daniel Hill, an ethical researcher, casually chatting with them on Telegram? And much more importantly, why should I, or you, the listener, trust any evidence or validation provided by a criminal who steals data for a living?
It is the most critical question of this entire deep dive, and answering it goes to the very heart of what Hill calls forensic OSINT. We have to separate moral endorsement from empirical extraction. Hill is absolutely not endorsing the criminal acts of pampa leaks. He is not their friend. He is not collaborating with them. But he recognizes a fundamental, grim reality of the modern digital landscape. We are operating in a complete trust vacuum.
A trust vacuum.
Yes. When the state actively lies to the public, prints fake firewall logs, and plants evidence in databases to protect its reputation, and when private corporations fabricate ghost cartels to sell $29,000 subscriptions, where do you go to find the objective truth about a system's architecture?
Right. Who's left?
Often, the only verifiable empirical truth left comes from the raw cryptographic artifacts provided by the underground. The threat actors don't care about public relations. They don't care about looking good on state television. They care strictly about operational success.
Right, so they have absolutely no incentive to lie about how they broke into the system.
Exactly. If PampaLeak says an API key was left hard-coded in plain text by a lazy Intel engineer, they don't just say it, they can mathematically prove it by showing the back-end access that specific key grants. Hill explicitly frames his use of these logs as a bounded exhibit. His methodology is strict. He does not extrapolate beyond the authenticated technical content of the chat. He takes the raw data they provide, the architectural maps, the servers, the API configurations, the admission of who is actually in their group, and he cross-references it to prove that the official state narrative is literally a physical and mathematical impossibility.
He is judoing them. He's using the criminals' own operational arrogance and their desire to brag to meticulously map out the government's incompetence.
That is the very essence of asymmetric intelligence. You use the raw outputs of the attacker to dismantle the lies of the defender.
But taking a step back, understanding the sheer depths of the state's forensic theater and seeing the terrifying reality of these unhindered threats, it's exhausting.
It is.
It feels incredibly hopeless for anyone trying to do the right thing. But that leads us to the final and perhaps the most practical part of Hill's work, the asymmetric playbook. Because just observing the collapse isn't enough. How do ethical researchers, how does anyone survive the great machine once its algorithm targets them?
Hill didn't just diagnose the disease, he wrote the survival guide. He developed a highly structured four-pillar defense framework, shifting the paradigm from standard vulnerability disclosure to full-scale asymmetric defense.
Let's trace the narrative evolution of these pillars because they build on each other based on his own survival. It starts with pillar number 1, zero contact disclosure and decentralized reputation firewalls.
Hill argues that the old way is dead. Using standard state ticketing systems or official email channels to report a critical flaw is essentially walking into a trap.
Yeah.
It just puts your name, your IP address, and your identity directly into the crosshairs of the machine. Instead, ethical hackers must use anonymous intermediaries.
Never give them your identity so they can't target your family or lock you in a box to extract a confession.
Exactly. But anonymity alone isn't enough because the state will just bury the flaw. So the second half of this pillar is the decentralized reputation firewall. Before you report the vulnerability through that anonymous proxy, you must archive the complete technical proof, the code, the hashes, the timestamps on immutable decentralized platforms.
Explain how that works mechanically. How does that actually protect you?
You take the vulnerability report and you cryptographically hash it, pushing that record onto a blockchain or a decentralized web protocol like IPFS. Once it is on the blockchain, it is timestamped and mathematically unalterable.
Right.
It cannot be deleted by a judge's order or a corporate takedown notice. You establish total control of the narrative before the state even knows you exist. If the state tries to rewrite history later and frame you, or claims the flaw didn't exist, you just point to the immutable ledger. Their attempt to alter the forensic record becomes mathematically impossible.
That is brilliant. It completely neutralizes the protocol of silence. And that brings us to pillar 2, which is my favorite. He calls it the proxy pivot or GDPR weaponization.
This is pure legal judo. Hill realized that local jurisdictions like the courts in Uruguay are often too corrupt or too technically illiterate to deliberately hold powerful state institutions accountable for data breaches. They will protect the local monopoly. So You bypass them entirely. You leverage international law.
You find a proxy.
Yes. In any massive data breach in Latin America, there is statistical certainty that the compromised database includes the information of dual citizens or expatriates who are currently residents of the European Union.
Right, so you find an EU resident whose data was caught up in this negligent Latin American system.
Exactly. And you use their compromised data status to trigger an official Article 33 violation under the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR.
Wow.
Suddenly, this negligent local telecommunications monopoly isn't dealing with a friendly, corrupt local judge they can influence. They are facing severe cross-border international accountability, massive EU investigations, and fines that can cripple their global operations. You force accountability from the outside in.
Which is a massive escalation. And Pillar 3 deals with the physical reality of state retaliation. The spoliation ultimatum. This is born directly out of his experience losing his crypto assets.
Right. Hill learned the hard way that arguing complex technological nuances with a judge is a losing battle. If you try to explain ISO-IEC 27037 chain of custody protocols, or how background processes alter memory states on a Samsung S7 to a judge who barely knows how to use their email, you will lose.
Their eyes glaze over. They don't understand the tech, and frankly, they don't care.
So you translate the technical forensic contamination into the only language the court truly understands and respects: financial liability. Hill advises that if law enforcement seizes your devices without proper Faraday isolation, and that seizure causes the loss of data, loss of business continuity, or the destruction of cryptocurrency access, you don't argue the cyber law. You sue the individual officers and the agency civilly for custodial theft and the destruction of asset value.
You hit them directly in the wallet. You make the act of seizing an ethical hacker's equipment so financially toxic and legally perilous for the department that they think twice before doing it.
Exactly. And finally, we have Pillar 4, which is the broader community call to action, the establishment of psychological and legal certs.
Now, CERT usually stands for Computer Emergency Response Team, the people who fix the servers. But Hill is repurposing the concept.
Yeah.
He isn't talking about responding to a malware virus. He's talking about responding to the state attacking a human being.
Yes. He advocates for formalizing these decentralized intelligence ecosystems like the CYBERMIDNIGHT CLUB he built to act as rapid response networks for framed researchers.
Yeah.
When a researcher is targeted by the machine, this network activates. It immediately crowdsources legal defense resources. It provides real-time forensic forecasting to publicly debunk the state's technical claims within hours. And it shines a blinding spotlight on any false flag operations, rallying the global community under the banner of #HackingIsNotACrime.
It's an entire parallel support structure. And we really need to emphasize to the listener that this asymmetric playbook isn't just an academic theory. It has visceral, real-world impact.
Yeah, it really does.
The sources briefly detail an event called the asymmetric defeat, where Hill utilized these exact decentralized intelligence tactics to completely dismantle a powerful, corrupt Mexican politician's criminal empire. It was a single ethical hacker systematically taking down a syndicate because he controlled the flow of undeniable technical truth.
And even closer to home, his relentless advocacy forced a massive systemic change in the very government that imprisoned him. Remember that chilling effect we discussed, where the Uruguayan white hat hackers completely stopped reporting flaws?
Yes, the state flew blind.
The structural paralysis from that chilling effect became so severe, and the subsequent breaches so undeniable, that the Uruguayan Congress was actually forced to change course. They formally invited Alberto Daniel Hill, the man they had wrongfully imprisoned and branded a criminal, to serve as an official advisor on new cybercrime legislation. His direct, consultative input was a primary catalyst for the passage of Law 20.327 in August and September of 2024.
He literally sat down and helped rewrite the legal code that the great machine had used to try and destroy him. It is an incredible full-circle victory.
So what does this all mean for the listener who isn't a hacker? Maybe you don't know how to code an API, or how to read a firewall log, or how to cryptographically sign an email with PGP. Why should you care about the struggles of Alberto Daniel Hill and the architecture of the CYBERMIDNIGHT CLUB?
You should care deeply, because this is fundamentally a battle for your digital sovereignty. It is about understanding that the massive institutions guarding your most intimate realities, your identity, your health records, your financial history, your biometrics, are fundamentally failing. And worse than failing, they are actively prioritizing their public relations over your protection.
It's the realization that in the modern digital age, institutional transparency isn't a vulnerability that needs to be hidden. Radical transparency is the only real security mechanism we have left.
Exactly. When the system is allowed to operate in the shadows, it only protects the incompetent. When the light is forcefully turned on, the truth secures us all.
To summarize this incredibly dense, fascinating journey, Alberto Daniel Hill took the profound, life-altering trauma of his 2017 wrongful imprisonment, and instead of letting the machine break him, he transformed that trauma into the fuel for a globally recognized, decentralized intelligence engine.
Yeah.
From debunking the low-level 2025 Bukibus defacements to exposing the massive, catastrophic 2026 2-8 identity collapse, he systematically dismantled the official narratives. He forced the public to look directly at the fragile, automated, great machine of digital justice.
He proved, empirically, that a single individual, armed with verifiable truth, radical transparency, and an asymmetric playbook, can successfully hold both the state and opportunistic corporate entities accountable.
But before we sign off, we want to leave you with a final thought, a concept to really mull over the next time you hear a news report about a massive data breach.
If we truly are living in the era of algorithmic jurisprudence, an era where our justice systems and state bureaucracies act as rigid, unthinking algorithms optimizing only for institutional reputation rather than objective truth, then we urgently need to reevaluate what we are afraid of.
We spend so much time and anxiety worrying about the sophisticated rogue hacker in a hoodie, sitting in a dark room halfway across the world, trying to break into our digital lives using complex code.
But perhaps that isn't the greatest threat to our future. Perhaps the greatest threat is vastly more mundane. It's the unthinking bureaucrat sitting in a brightly lit, comfortable office, quietly deleting the error logs of our digital lives just to protect the protocol of silence.
Think back to the beginning of our deep dive. You discover the door to the vault is wide open. You want to fix it. But what happens when the machine itself decides that your desire to fix the system, your ethical, technical curiosity, is actually a bug that needs to be permanently patched? Who will the algorithm select as its next processed body? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay secure, and always, always demand transparency.